Greg, are you in the playroom?
Guest room, yes. Yeah.
There's like stars and moons on the wall.
Which is strange that they've never been visible before. I think I must have had my desk in a different orientation. But we should be good to go.
There's like stars and moons on the wall.
Good to go?
I think I must have had my desk in a different orientation. We should be good to go.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and start the meeting tonight. Just for the record, Chair Strom wasn't feeling well, so she's not attending tonight's meeting. Vice Chair, I will be leading the meeting today, so I apologize to the community about that. I kid. Can we please do a roll call? Commissioner Heising?
Present.
Commissioner LeBlanc?
Present.
Commissioner Maggio?
Present.
Commissioner Mason?
Present.
Commissioner Radnich?
Present.
And the Vice Chair is present. Can somebody move to adopt the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second. Do we need to do a person by person on this, Greg?
Yes.
Okay. So we've got a second. Commissioner Heising?
Yes, I second it.
Okay. Commissioner LeBlanc?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Mason?
Aye.
Commissioner Radnich?
Aye.
Vice Chair Farzan, aye. So we've adopted the agenda. Do we have any public comments on things not on tonight's agenda?
And if anyone would like to speak on items not on the agenda, you would indicate your desire to speak by pressing the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen or by pressing *9 on the telephone. So at this point, we are not seeing any raised hands, so we'll take that as an indication of no public comment on items not on the agenda.
Great, thank you. We don't have anything on the consent calendar, no continued public hearings. So we will move to our new public hearing, HDP 07-19, Leela Reddy, R20 zoning issues. Can we get the staff report, please?
Yes, let me just share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, commissioners. The item before you is HTP 0719, formerly HDP 0812, which proposes to construct a new two-story home of approximately 4,000 gross square feet with a height of 35 feet on an undeveloped lot at 3933 Quail Ridge Road. The project is requesting a phase 1 hillside development siting and massing, an exception for development within a class 2 ridgeline setback, variances for development within required setbacks, design review for height exceeding 17 feet, grading permit to exceed 200 cubic yards, and a tree permit to remove 7 trees. The subject property is zoned R20 within the Hillside Overlay District and proposes construction within the Class 2 ridgeline setback. The 1.8-acre lot is steep and slopes downward with a 100-foot elevation difference from northwest to southeast. The lot is currently vacant with the prior home located on site demolished in 1997 as a result of a 3.7-acre landslide that affected just over a half dozen properties in Quail Ridge Road, a private road. Quail Ridge Road was stabilized with a tieback wall and reinforced. A few years later, the pumping system installed during the road repair failed and reactivated the landslide below. The pump system and the road were repaired, but the landslide below was not. The previous owner submitted a phase 1 application to construct a new home in 2004, but withdrew it in 2007 after the city peer reviewed the geotechnical documents and received public comments expressing concern over the project's potential to trigger further instability. In 2012, the subsequent owner and current applicant submitted a new application, and it was heard by the Planning Commission in July 2012. The commission continued it to August and requested additional geotechnical information, legal review, and attendance by geotechnical engineers at the project's following hearing. The item was ultimately continued without discussion to a further date to be determined after staff concluded that the project required additional environmental review to analyze potential impacts. This is the area of the properties affected by the landslide. Since 2012, a focused EIR, environmental impact report, has been prepared after it was determined that impacts to geology and soils were found to be potentially significant. Upon further review of geology and soils, which includes 15 geological and geotechnical investigations dating from 1997 to 2019, and those are listed in this table to the right, the EIR concluded that the project's potentially significant adverse environmental impacts were found to be less than significant with implementation of required mitigation measures and standard conditions of approval. Since the lot is constrained by zoning setbacks, class 2 ridgeline setback, and the landslide area, as well as steep topography, construction is proposed at the northeast corner of the lot. The applicant submitted 3 preliminary siting and massing designs for construction. First is their proposed option, which requires variances encroaching within the required front and side setbacks. This option obscures the garage doors and mitigates apparent impacts along Quail Ridge Road. However, the encroachments are excessive and proposes the removal of 7 trees to also accommodate a driveway turnaround. These are their 2 other alternatives, which would not require variances, but would require height variances unless they were revised to 35-foot max. Alternative A is the smallest of the 3 options and has the least amount of area cantilevered over the slide mass. This configuration maintains a reasonably sized home and would require the removal of 4 trees instead of 7. Alternative B is the largest of the 3 options and has the most area cantilevered over the slide mass. This configuration maximizes the buildable area, but it does not meet design review guidelines since it's solid and boxy. And this is a side-by-side comparison of the massing, the setbacks, and the trees to be removed between the 3 different options proposed. Since publication of the staff report, staff received 2 public comments, one from the neighbor Leroy Kwan, located directly south of the subject property, expressing concern over site stability and potential impacts to his property due to the unrepaired landslide. Another was from Bob McLean, pointing out the incorrect ratio and required mitigation tree quantity referenced in the staff report for the staff packet for the undeveloped lot. Staff confirmed that the 36 trees you mentioned in the email would be required based on the proposed siting and removal of 7 trees, and staff is recommending modification to the resolution reflecting the calculation correction. Staff is recommending certification of the AIR and adopting resolution 2020-16 with the mitigation monitoring and report MMRP, and approving the project with the alternative A configuration with a maximum height of 35 feet subject to conditions, and the correction to resolution 2020-17 regarding the required tree mitigation calculation. That's the end of my report. I'm free to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Mason?
I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but Nancy, I emailed you earlier under the item 9, and I'm comparing this to the page 132 of 183 of the mitigation monitoring report. They do not agree. I mean, the mitigation monitoring report has the hours of operation 6 to 8, for example, instead of 8 to 6.
The mitigation monitoring report references a different code section, the health and safety section. But in this case, the conditions of approval, the more stricter requirement of that's in the conditions of approval would apply.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you. So just a question on one of the, relative to the MMRP, so the Geo 2A, I think it is, on utility redundancy. It talks about the utility pipes being inside a shell, if you will, or an outer pipe. And just so I'm clear, is that for anything that might leak and cause damage to the slide? So water, storm drain, sewer, or is it, which utilities is that? Is that proposed?
That's my understanding, but I also have the SQL consultants as panelists as well, and they can respond to you.
Yes, hi, Darcy Kremen with Rincon. We did not design that mitigation measure. That actually came from your civil engineer, but it is to contain any leaks that come from plumbing that may reactivate the slide downhill. So the idea was to doubly protect that landslide. So the project could reactivate the slide if any water leaks, but it's also a drainage issue. So that was designed by internal staff with the city of Lafayette.
Okay, so is it relative to, which utility is it relative to? All three that I mentioned, or just the drainage?
It's drainage. Sorry, I'm not a civil engineer, so you're gonna have to forgive me on that. Yes to drainage. And I believe it's also water and wastewater. So it's all three.
Okay, and my presumption is they go to the street, the sewer lateral and water lateral go to the street, not downhill to the southerly neighbor's house.
Correct.
Through the southerly property.
Right. No, everything comes from the property, goes into the street where the city's utilities are. It's more if there's any leaks, any drips from that, even though it's going that direction, we don't want it to get under the slide somehow.
Yeah, understood. Okay. All right, thanks. That answers my question.
Let's go to Commissioner Maggio and then back to Commissioner Mason.
Okay, thank you very much, Vice Chair. I've got a question since we have some of the consultants on the Zoom call. If they could tell me a little bit more about the bedrock. In 2012, when we saw this project, we were all very concerned about geology. I know there was a full-blown EIR done, and really our concern all along has been geology and water management, and then appropriateness of the project for the site. So I've read through the geology reports. I'm trying to get a handle on how deep the bedrock is. It looks like it's about 32 feet down, and sandstone. Now, sandstone doesn't really sound very hard. I wonder if there's someone that could comment on that.
We do have Kevin Ryan online with us. I see he's joined us. He may be able to speak to it. It might go to the applicant's geotechnical consultants. So we had a lot of different geotechnical consultants on this. Definitely not in my wheelhouse. Kevin, can you speak to that? He's on mute.
How was that?
Oh, here he is.
Hi. Apparently my camera's not working, but yeah, I mean, in La Verenda and Lafayette in specific, Let me see, how does that work? You know, the bedrock is kind of weak. It's mainly clay stone. Sandstone in this area actually is some of the better bedrock. I think, you know, the geotechnical engineer and their team for the applicant can speak more to what they think the strength of it is. But, you know, in Lafayette, the sandstone really is the ridge formers and it's the resistant rock. So it actually is a lot better. It's not sand.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Maggio?
Yes,
Thank you. Commissioner Mason?
Thank you. I actually will have a bunch of questions for the geotech, but I'll save them for Alan Kropp, the geotech's engineer. I just had one question, or actually two questions. One is the requirement for sleeving the drains, and we talked to follow up on Commissioner Heising's comments. Is that because of fear of soil movement? And then if it is because of fear of soil movement, shouldn't we also include natural gas, because any breaking of a natural gas line actually is a safety hazard?
I can't speak to that. I don't know if Nancy, do we have anyone from Public Works on who can speak to that? My understanding it was just water that could possibly, very small potential, reactivate the slide, but I don't know about natural gas. But like I said, it comes from your engineering department, so could be a question to follow up on if natural gas could potentially reactivate the slide.
Yeah, this is Kevin Ryan again, the geologist that was working with Darcy on that. You know, water tends to migrate downhill and get into slide planes and reactivate slide movement. I've never heard of natural gas doing something like that. So the mitigation, as I understood, it wasn't to prevent leaks, it was to prevent leaks from water-bearing utilities that might add water to the landslide. So it's strictly a water issue.
Yeah, I think that's the original intent.
Thank you. That clears that up. The second question is, you mentioned that all drainage, water, sewer will go back to the street. Now, it's noted in the geotechnical report that for the 18-foot slide wall, it needs a subdrain system below, behind that wall. And given the depth of that subdrain system, I'm not sure how are you proposing to get that water out without going downhill?
This is Kevin Ryan again. You know, that's really a better question for the applicant's engineering team. But, you know, there are different systems. The drainage behind the wall of a subsurface retaining structure is meant to capture subsurface water or groundwater. The mitigation measure, as I understand it, is for the water-bearing utilities that would be more, and surface water issues. So they're really two different separate issues.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any more questions from the commissioners? Commissioner LaBonge?
I just want to make sure, and we don't necessarily need to do it now, but that we could have a relative residence and we see the size of the houses. Can we have that ready? I think it's gonna, I would like to have purview to that later when we're getting a little more detailed. I think that might be for use. So just giving you a heads up. That's it.
Stephen, just as a heads up, you're going in and out a little bit. You're coming up a little staticky. Do we have any more questions for staff or the analysts? Okay, looks like we're clear on that part. So is the applicant ready with their presentation?
I will add them as a panelist.
I will bring them into the meeting. One moment. Ravi Reddy will be representing the owner. Mr. Kropp is the geotech, my understanding. So
Here, oh, you can't hear me.
you are now unmuted.
Oh, hi, I'm Ravi Reddy. I'm the owner's representative. And we also have, as part of our team, Mr. Alan Kropp, I believe, is here as well. He's the project geotechnical engineer. And I guess I'll give my presentation. My main focus is going to be to do with the different massing proposals. There's obviously been a lot of very careful analysis surrounding the geology and geotechnical engineering issues that the property has. Obviously, we're very, very cognizant of how this is a very sensitive development site. And we've taken a long time and very methodically tried to address issues regarding the safety of construction here and any corollary issues. So I would just say that, you know, we haven't something that's unprecedented or very rarely done for a single family house. So we have this environmental impact report completed. Obviously a robust amount of engineering analysis, and much of which was all peer reviewed over the years, has been completed and demonstrates that the site is safe to build on. So what I would refer any questions of a technical or geotechnical nature to Mr. Kropp. Should I proceed with the massing? I guess I will. So if we, Nancy, if you could move to page 9 of the project plans. So this basically is a nice little illustration of our proposed massing, which is at the bottom right. And this is our favored approach. Now all of these have pros and cons. So I'll start out with our proposed massing, which is also on page 1 in more detail. But this shows you that what we're essentially doing here, it's a complex design in terms of foundation and layout and construction. Not the cheapest way to go, but it does result in a very interesting and creative design that flows with the natural topography of the hill. And it really works with the topography of the building envelope rather than, just, digging a hole and sticking a structure on there. Now, if I could refer us to page, let me see here, page 2, Nancy? Do we have page 2? Yes, okay. So page 2 is the proposed design. So as you can see, it works with the contours. I don't know if you can see them there, but those are essentially, you have 2 or 3 blocks. You have the garage block, which is only single story. Then you have the brown middle block, which is, again, working with the topography. And then the final block, the dark sort of brown, is again angled to work with the natural contours of the site. One of the biggest advantages of this layout is that if you were standing on Quail Ridge Road and looking out at the house and down, all you're going to see is approximately 10 or 12 feet. So it's going to look like it's actually a single story house because the garage elevation is only a single story from the street. And then we flow down the hill, and much of this building is not actually visible from the street. An illustration of that would be, if I could take you to, let's see here, the last page. So Nancy, if you could move us to page 10. This is sort of a cross section of the 3 different massings. And as viewed from the street, the proposed massing has the least impact as viewed from the street. So unfortunately, to accomplish the proposed massing, we do require encroachment into the side yard. And it appears it's very significant encroachment. However, I do draw the commission's attention to the fact that the nearest house that would be impacted by that is about 170 feet away. So if we encroach in, 10 feet, 12 feet into the side yard, the impact on that neighbor is negligible. Plus, there's a very, very heavy screening of the trees, as you can see on page 2. The other advantage of this layout is it complies. There's no height variance required. It also has the advantage of not having the garage door face the street directly. It's angled away, and that way, when you're having the cars coming and going from the garage, they don't drive straight out into the road. There's room to maneuver them in. So there's some advantages here. Like I said, I find it very attractive. I like the architecture. It would be exciting to build something like this. Out of the 3 possible proposals, I feel this would add the greatest value to the neighborhood. So that's our proposed design. I then would like to take you, if we can go back to page 9, to proposal alternative A, which is called the temple. And you can see the massing there on page 9, bottom left. This is it's a feasible and functional layout. It's more cost effective to build something like this, since you're working with without any oblique angles. It works a little bit against the natural topography compared to the proposal. However, there are some advantages, and if I could move us to page 7. So page 7 is a more detailed analysis of alternative A. And you can see the advantage of this layout is we are not encroaching into the front yard setback, although the garage door is dead, it faces straight onto the street, which I find to be less attractive. But it doesn't encroach into the front yard, doesn't encroach into the side yard. Our original schematic had a pitched roof and required a height of 37.5 feet by code. Our new concept, and which we would flesh out at design review, would be to consider a flat roof for this, probably for all of the designs. And what that would end up doing is not requiring a height variance. So I think that's something to consider. Another advantage of alternative A is I believe we're only removing 4 trees. The cluster of trees in the front are not required to be removed, so that'll require less tree mitigation. But this is a feasible alternative. I believe staff supports alternative A. From our position, this is feasible and functional. I don't find it as architecturally as exciting as the proposed massing, but that is alternative A. And then finally, I would draw attention to page 8, which is the plan view, or page 9 at the bottom middle, which is a sort of isometric projection there of our proposal, or alternative B. Essentially, this is not something we're really interested in constructing. It doesn't, I don't believe it follows the city guidelines, but we present it just to show what could be theoretically constructed. So those are the 3 architectural massing models that we wanted to present. My other comment, and then I would turn over, obviously later if there's any questions to Mr. Kropp. My other comment relates to issues such as grading of the site, drainage issues. I'm actually very familiar with hillside development in La Miranda. And those sorts of issues we typically address in very great detail during design review. Once we have a site and siting and massing determined, we then tailor the grading and drainage followed from that and are determined by those choices. So that's kind of my presentation, and obviously I'm available to answer any detailed questions. I'm very familiar with the project, and we've been working on this for a long time. So, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is Mr. Kropp going to present, or is he just here for questions?
We could have him present if you wish, if you require. Would you like that, or would you rather have him address your questions? Probably better to have him address your questions, I think.
Yes, I think that's fine. And Greg, how are we on time? I mean, questions is a different issue, but we still have time if there was some presentation available to Mr. Crop?
There was about 30 seconds left.
Okay, so why don't we
I didn't
just go
realize how long I
ahead?
talked.
That's perfectly fine. I think we can go ahead and move. Yeah, we can go towards questions. So any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Mason?
Thank you very much, Chair Farzan. These questions are for Mr. Crop, specifically relate to the 18-foot slide wall. Before I start, I want to say that, I realize that most people don't have extensive experience working with geotechnical engineers. I'm not one of them. I have known his firm for forever. For 25 years, I owned and ran my own structural design firm, and we worked with Alan Crop and Associates innumerable times, and I do have supreme confidence with them. So I do not want anybody to think that my questions are a statement on their firm. I am the type of person, I hold that there's no such thing as a minor foundation problem. There's either major foundation problems or no foundation problems. And I'm pretty sure Mr. Crop shares the same philosophy. First question is, could you explain, or shall you make reference to an 18-foot tall slide wall, but I couldn't find anything which showed the proposed extent of that wall. Do you have anything there, even just a guesstimate?
Well, right at the edge of the scarp, there will be a tied back wall that will be about 40 feet deep that will restrain about 18 feet of slide material. So that's the idea, or not slide material, weaker material that is potentially prone to some types of movement. So it's really a 40-foot deep, probably tied back wall that's entirely independent of the house foundation. Then you set back from that, and then there's a special house foundation entirely separate from the slide repair wall system.
Thank you. Next question is, did you do your own borings, or are you still relying on the original borings of the other geotechnical engineer 97 or something like that?
Well, when we were first involved in 2003, we engaged William Lettuce and Associates to do the geologic characterization. They did a long trench and they did a boring. Then when Paul Seidelman was involved, he did some additional boring work, including a large diameter boring. When we ramped up again recently, we did 2 additional test pits, and the geologic consultant we used was Jim Joyce, who had been the person that logged the large diameter boring for Paul Seidelman in 2008. So there's been a number of different people. Our most recent work was just 2 trenches to get as clear a definition of the edge of the slide as we could, as we felt within the slide area, the past Lettuce boring and Seidelman boring with Jim Joyce had been adequate characterization of the general area of the house.
Thank you. To follow up on a question from Commissioner Maggio, for the bedrock, what were the blow counts, and how would you characterize the bedrock, both from how hard it is and the ability for a drill rig to get down there and penetrate?
Well, the blow counts, I'm flipping over to the William Lettuce boring log. They get that handy. They hit bedrock at a depth of about 7 feet. That is where they first hit the sandstone. And they were getting blow counts in that sandstone of usually teens and 20s. That's okay to good for Orinda formation material. It got somewhat better with depth. The large diameter hole doesn't do blow counts. Blow counts are when you take samples. So the only blow count material came from the William Lettuce boring that they did back in, what was that, 2003, I believe.
Thank you. Next question is, your report mentions drainage behind your 40-foot wall. I'm not sure where you're draining to.
Well, I think we talk about a subdrain along the uphill edge of the house to get drainage, as well as all the roof drainage. I'm not sure, again, maybe it was in there, I don't recall it. I'm not sure we want to put a drain down behind a 40-foot wall, just because, you know, at that point, you're drilling much deeper than into the bedrock. I don't want to get any water down there, let alone try and maintain a subdrain pipe. Subdrains usually are picking up small amounts of water. In this area, the bedrock is inclined into the hill, so water that would be following any preferred bedding paths would actually be going away from the slide. So I'm not anticipating a subdrain per se behind the tied back wall.
Then I apologize for that previous question, because I don't remember, and if it's there, I missed it, a hydrostatic component to your big tieback wall for the loading, design load.
Well, normally that kind of wall would probably be with treated wood lagging or concrete lagging. We'd have gapped lagging that would allow any moisture that's building up behind the lagging to flow through it rather than trap it. I would just as soon not collect any water behind that wall. So it would not be intended to be a solid faced wall. It would intend to be a lagged wall that would allow seepage that might be on the uphill side of it to pass through.
Do you foresee, for that tiebacks, do you foresee any of the tiebacks extending under the house?
Yes, almost certainly tiebacks will go underneath the house, and thereby creates part of our challenge in carefully locating them, because we're going to be drilling deep house piers and threading the needle between some of those tiebacks as we do so. So yes, the tiebacks will potentially go through some areas where there will later be house piers. And obviously we have to be very careful when we do that.
Thank you very much for questions. These are some, I don't want to say suggestions, things that would make me feel more comfortable. They're as much for Mr. Reddy as for you. One of the things in your geotechnical report, you have the standard boilerplate language, which essentially says we recommend that we're retained for contract administration. Given what you just answered that last question, I'd feel much more comfortable if it was, you know, we're given some assurance or you were required to do it rather than just given the option.
I would never object to anybody mandating that we be hired, so I think it's a wonderful idea. But usually we use discretionary language in our reports. But then if we're not hired, we'll sometimes send a little nastygram on to the owner and say, you know, this was going to be confirmed by the actual construction process, and you didn't hire us, so gee, who knows what could happen out there.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we didn't get some wet behind the ear who didn't know the site out there and interpreted your results.
I think you're a wise man, Greg.
Should I respond to this? No.
Please do.
I was just going to say, so I'm actually a licensed contractor, and I do consulting that specializes in hillside development, especially with very deep foundations. Even in typical projects, we would never build anything without having full review from our geotech. So, and that goes for straightforward projects. So we would never even tackle something like this without doing so.
Thank you. The next question, comment, you mentioned in your report that, and again, obviously it depends upon tiebacks and things like that. And would you be prepared? Would you be prepared to provide an estimated top of pier deflection. And what I was going to suggest was we have that surveyed. So if there's a problem, we could find out early and address it early, rather than waiting to say, hey, you know, something did happen.
So are you asking if there is a monitoring system that would be created on that wall so that we can have some confidence that it's not moving, or if it does, when do we would get worried? What deflection is worrisome? Is that your question?
I wouldn't necessarily use the word monitoring. I would just say, you know, if you were to say that, hey, for these slide piers, if we, you know, we expect a maximum deflection of 1 inch at the top of the pier, and we survey them initially, and if somebody gets worried, you can come back out and survey them again and find, hey, this is 2 inches off. We better, you know, contact Mr. Crop.
Sure, we could set up some kind of a criteria that if that threshold is exceeded, the situation should be evaluated.
The other next question I have is, due to the size of the piers, would you be comfortable between you and Mr. Reddy establishing a max length of time that the pier can be left open both in a wet season and dry season, or is that not a particular concern of yours?
Well, being that there was no water encountered in the borings in a summer situation, which I would assume this is more of summertime construction, I wouldn't have a specific worry. If during the drilling of the shaft we start hitting water, then our concern level arises, and we would probably be advising Mr. Reddy at that point that we may have to transition to a drill and pour approach. But as I sit here now, it's not a particular concern.
We generally like to do a drill and pour anyway. Those are very, like any kind of pier, boring is very dangerous if left unattended. So that's, yeah, this would be even more so.
That's my preference also. Mr. Reddy, would you be willing, the staff report estimates somewhere over 200 cubic yards of grading, but that's somewhat disingenuous because it doesn't include spillage from the piers. Now, from our last meeting where we had the terraces, off-haul and things like that were very contentious. It's a narrow road. Would you be willing to have your consultants work up a spillage estimate so we can have a better estimate of the amount of dirt that needs to be off-hauled?
Yes, and we, as I mentioned in my presentation, those sorts of calculations are done once we have a design that we take to design review and we do our grading and drainage plans. For example, the layout, the proposed layout, proposed massing has a completely different requirement for pier locations, a number of piers than the other two have as well. So absolutely, and that's something we do regardless. One little note that I wanted to make though, because we have cantilevered, significant cantilever with this house, this actually has would have, whatever is built here is going to have fewer piers drilled than the house would have had if the whole thing was sited on a foundation. So the number and quantity of tailings or spoils is actually not as critically significant as one might think, even though there is these are deep and 30-inch diameter, and if we're saying at 40 feet deep, is about 7 cubic yards per pier of tails coming out.
Thank you. And for the record, I am not worried about the foundation for residents. It's mostly just the big wall. And then one last thing is, would you be willing to work with the city to address some of the unique safety concerns on this project? Let's say a 30-inch diameter by 40-foot deep pier can swallow a teenager, and you know the usual putting a piece of plywood over the hole might not be sufficient. So I wanted to see something a little bit more than a, you know, 6-foot chain link fence and a video camera and a piece of plywood. You know, and obviously the sooner you pour afterwards, the better off we are, but realizing that there's going to be a lot of steel in there and that has to be fabricated and, you know, kept on site and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make that you're amenable to working to address concerns. When I was out there this weekend, there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood, and teenagers aren't always the brightest when it comes to safety.
Yes, absolutely. And the answer would be yes. I should also mention this is not a project that is designed to be sold. It's actually the applicant's own residence that she's trying to build. So it's a family member of mine. And so the issues such as, you know, deflection on the wall or long-term stability of the house are extremely critically important to the applicant. And addressing your question in particular, you know, the last project we did, we only had 20-foot deep piers. There were, I think, 24 inches wide. Those are significantly dangerous in themselves. So those sorts of safety protocols are absolutely critical, and we would follow them no matter what, and would be willing to work with the city and as you suggest.
Thank you very much. As I stated previously, I'm comfortable with Mr. Kropp. We have a long history, and I just wanted to make certain that, you know, we didn't have any unforeseen problems. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant or the geologist? Commissioner Maggio.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I know there was a lot of discussion about a 40-foot separation wall, and I assume that's to separate the project from the slide area. I'm wondering, it's my understanding that the slide on that particular property has not been repaired, and has there been discussion about repairing it?
I will refer that to Mr. Kropp.
So the 40-foot wall refers to the depth of the wall, just to be clear. It's not a horizontal dimension, it's a vertical dimension. And it's to basically isolate the developed property from the slide that we have every expectation is going to keep moving. That slide that's present there is huge. I think somebody estimated $5 or $10 million or so if somebody wanted to start fixing the slide. So the idea with this is the slide's not going to get fixed. It's going to keep moving. Let's protect the proposed house very carefully and conservatively from that ongoing movement. So it will be designed with the expectation that the slide will keep moving, although moving kind of parallel to where the house is, you know, laterally, not impacting, but you could have some edges kind of caving off toward that, which is why this big wall goes in. It keeps the edges in place as the slide moves along the side of the property.
The only thing I'd like to add is the construction of either one of these proposals will result in much more stability for that the building envelope area. My layperson's analogy is always, it's like having a layer cake that's just got many layers. When you stick a lot of toothpicks or pencils through it, it's a lot stronger than what's there right now. Plus, when you add all the stormwater and drainage features that we're going to be putting into the project, we're going to have a much better and safer situation by building this house for that street than presently exists.
Okay, I have one more question. When I was up there, I noticed that the street is showing movement. It looks like it had a recent slurry seal or a seal on top of it, and already it's showing cracks. So I'm a little concerned that there is movement up on that street. And I know construction with off-haul of trucks are heavy. What precautions are you taking to protect the integrity of the street so water doesn't seep into larger cracks, and what mitigations are going to happen after construction to put any damage, to fix any damage to the street?
I can just very quickly, from my own experience in construction in La Miranda, This is something that we encounter all the time, and we are required to keep the street, when we finish the project, to have it in as good condition, if not better. So the slurry seal situation is something that goes on as part of Quail Roof's maintenance schedule and profile program, but we would have to even supersede that and repair any cracking or anything that was caused by our vehicles.
Okay. Last question. I know you don't have a design yet, but how deep are you anticipating these piers are going to have to go to provide the stability for a cantilever design?
Mr. Crop could address.
Sure. For the house piers, what we've suggested is they need to go at least 10 feet into bedrock, which near the wall, we're assuming doesn't start till 18 feet. So the minimum depth for those, which is where the cantilever loads will go, will at least be 28 feet. And I would suspect by the time some good structural engineering is done for those cantilever loads, they may be deeper than that. But the house piers near the wall would be at least 28 feet deep.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner LaBonge?
No more just design oriented, even though I'm not a design person. So I think Mr. Reedy, am I pronouncing it right? Ready. Mr. Reddy. So when you were explaining the different alternatives, it sounded like the proposed and alternative A were acceptable, and alternative B was just more of just to show what could a preferred, and you're speaking on the client's behalf. So I'm kind of trying to get my mind behind, because alternative A is much smaller than the proposed alternative. So it's just from a house, it's what, 2,000 square feet less?
No, I think it's about 1,200 or 1,400. It's 35.
Oh, I'm sorry,
1,100.
yeah.
I think 1,100. It is smaller, but the bigger issue, the bigger difference is really the architecture and the excitement of the proposal is alternative A. My personal feeling, at least.
I mean, when I first read the package, I'll be my feeling was, visited the site, my kind of thinking has morphed a little, and part of that is based on the site constraints, and I'm not as concerned with the east side, but one of my questions also is, have you guys talked to the owners to the east? Have you just asked them, hey, would it bother you if we were 3 feet off your property, even though that's, inside the setback? Because I think I'd be curious, and I would hope you do.
Yes, I know them personally. In fact, they were communicating with us over some branches that had fallen last fall. So yes, we do have communications. There was a change in ownership for that property, but what I would really like to draw your attention to is it's 100. The house is, I think, 150 feet away, and there's a lot of screening. So the impact, because remember, ownership can change, but the impacts are severely minimal, and there's ways to mitigate them. Another point that I'd like to mention is both of these proposals are actually very modest in terms of house size for the street. I believe the house immediately next to us is about 4,000 square feet. The one up the hill, there's one that's 6,500 square feet. Most of them are around 3,500 to 4,000 square feet. So one of the problems with alternative A, it's not the most effective way to develop the site from the point of view of a lot of fixed costs and then a small house at the end of the day, although we do respect all the setbacks. I feel that it's, after all this work and analysis, we end up with something that is less of a benefit to the neighborhood in terms of value creation or maintaining value in the neighborhood than the proposed would be. but that's why I really do feel bullish about the proposal.
Let me, so thank you. I just want to kind of ask you that question again. And it's okay if the answer is the guys next door, the family next door doesn't like it. I just want to know if A, you've asked them, and B, have they said, yes, we're okay, or no, we're not. Neither one disqualify you. I just want to know. It makes my job easier if all the neighbors say, hey, it's great, we love what they've done. But that's not always the case. It doesn't mean they get turned down.
Yes, to answer your question, I discussed the project. It's actually Mr. Millar, Greg Millar, on a couple of occasions, and he had just purchased his property, which is the former Chang house. That's the one that's immediately to the east. And I didn't get into a specific 3 foot and the 3 foot is only one corner of the house. The vast majority of the encroachment is probably averaging more like 7 to 8 feet. I didn't ask him, I apologize, I didn't ask him exactly that question that you're posing, but in more of a generality, he seemed to indicate to me that he would like to see something developed there rather than just having this vacant landslide. It's kind of has an abandoned feeling to it. So I got the feeling that he was supportive of development here, but I could be, I can't speak for him.
Okay, that's fair enough. I just thought I'd ask.
But I had a cordial conversation with him, and I have his cell phone number. He has mine, and we are in contact if there's any. Because we have a common property line, so we're in contact if there's any issue.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I don't think there's any visibility. I mean, you can't see their house at all from your property or from the property. I don't think it's a bad idea to have the neighbor next door be supportive, but it's not required. Just so, all right. So my other question, and I do find that as a non-design person, I find the design very interesting. I do like how the the driveway and the garage are not teed in, and there's like a hammer, so you can, I think that's important, especially on, there's a little bit of a curve on here. So I think it's good to have the ability to come out and not be backing out on the street. It's not it does dead end, so it's not a super high travel. Couple other quick little questions. On the overhang versus the, I really like these renderings. I was struggling to see, so in your proposed massing rendering, the top one of the three, and I did kind of look at how high these are, and you mentioned that in your beginning. It doesn't actually show the height, but and you can kind of surmise that the top of the living room or the gray area, I don't know, was something in it. Of all three, it was the lowest. So I thought that was, I thought that was from the street. But the one question I had is the part that's cantilevered over that you're showing in kind of the gray massing where the kitchen is and the view deck. That seems like a lot more than the plan view. And I just was, am I not seeing right? Because the plan view, it's kind of, these are a little oblique to each other. So you're kind of cutting off a corner, but it seems like when I look at the dotted line of the cantilevered over grade on your A2 drawing, it doesn't look like that much is cantilevering over the lower deck, which says.
I think the problem is my mic on. Let's see here. The problem is that the very last page, so page 10, is a section through the middle of the house, and the gray shading at the back shows you what's kind of behind it, and it's not completely accurate. It's just sort of to give you a feeling for the relative architectural variances there between the different models.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. The only other thing I'm very excited to speak about the design here. There was actually an inspiration for the proposed massing, and the concept was to have these different parts of the house, with one of them feeling very old and one feeling kind of new and kind of like it was added on to an older existing structure. And we were going to come up with some ideas of mixing materials, kind of like older materials maybe on one block and then another block with more modern materials. Another inspiration was actually, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Falling Water, which is a famous house by Frank Lloyd Wright. And it really is on a very similar topography. It has a stream going through it, but it's a downslope, and the house is built around the topography. And that's why I'm actually excited, even though it's a very expensive way to build, to sort of have all these offset blocks with the proposed massing. So that's just my personal take on it.
No, I appreciate it. You've got my questions answered. Thank you. I find it very.
Thank you.
I want to hear what the rest of the people say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Commissioner Radnich, hopefully you're not on a landline or that Commissioner LeBonge is on. His dial-up is very slow.
No, thank you. So this question is a little bit for the applicant and a little bit for the CEQA consultant. So in the CEQA document, they have an alternative section. And so alternatives includes alternative 1, no project, alternative 2, landslide stabilization, and they have an environmentally superior alternative. So I'm hoping that between the applicant, probably likely more the CEQA consultant, you can just kind of draw the conclusion or just kind of connect the dots between the alternatives analyzed in the CEQA document and alternatives A and B, and how alternatives A and B play into things.
I'll start with the CEQA perspective. So CEQA asks us to do 2 things when we look at CEQA alternatives. It asks us to look at alternatives that would meet most of the project objectives and reduce or avoid environmental impacts that we found. So our alternatives are not design alternatives. They have nothing to do with the structure, the way it looks. For us, it was what are the impacts of the project and where it's placed. And because there's a lot of the variances required for zoning, for the setbacks, and because of the mitigation measures required, we felt that the best CEQA alternative was to put the house back where it used to be prior to 1998 when the slide occurred. So out of the setbacks, stabilize the landslide, which is a huge engineering feat, but that would meet the CEQA alternatives to meet most of the project objectives, which is to build a house on the site and reduce or avoid environmental impacts to the extent feasible. So that's what we analyze. The only other alternative would be to build a house somewhere else, right? But that's not really the purpose, was to reuse that site for a single family house. So that's the CEQA alternative. Now, the design alternatives are totally different. And I'll let the applicant speak to their thoughts on the design alternatives.
Were there any questions about design alternatives other than repairing the landslide? Unfortunately, that option of repairing the landslide isn't economically feasible. So were there any design questions?
No, there wasn't a design question. I was just for the public hoping that it could just be clarified, you know, the alternatives A and B have the name alternative in it, but alternatives A and B were not analyzed in the CEQA document. So it's just kind of clarifying what is analyzed in terms of alternatives in the CEQA document versus what is being proposed, because alternatives A and B and the proposed project that we're seeing do not include a landslide stabilization, correct? Applicant, Mr. Reddy?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for clarification, we could have called them CEQA alternatives and design alternatives, and they're very different.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I just wanted to make sure people understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions from the commissioners? I'll take that as a no. Do we have any public comments?
We do. If you would like to comment, please go ahead and click the raise hand button or hit *9 on your phone. So Hannah Dunn is coming into the meeting, and
Greg or Nancy or one of you timing, or do you want me to do it? I'm happy to do it if you want me to.
I'm happy to.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dunn, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate everyone's careful thought on this and consideration. I had some questions. First off, in the report, it mentioned that there were only 2 public comments, but I know I myself have sent 2 letters, and I believe other neighbors have sent letters as well. So I'm not quite clear why those have not been reflected as being comments registered in the record.
They were noted in the staff report, but the 2 comments that I had mentioned were since publication.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. And how many comments then were there from neighbors? Do you know?
Total from the draft EIR or?
It doesn't, I don't want to waste time on it. I think they were substantial, but anyway, so I have heard a lot about some of the geotechnological considerations, and I'm not a geotech, I'm a lawyer. So my main concern about this is what happens to the neighbors who've invested substantial life savings in their homes if this landslide is reactivated? What assurances, what insurance, what compensation would there be? It's not clear to me why we all have to bear this risk. And I haven't even heard what would happen to, protect the road, because Mr. Reddy hasn't even paid his road maintenance dues. And he says that he's a hillside development expert and that he knows drainage, but he actually dumped substantial quantities of dirt and gravel on both sides of the site, dislodging the drainage hose some years ago. So that was, I think, 3 years ago when we first moved in. Another question I have is, we're new to the neighborhood, but I'm not clear why a project that was not approved in 2012 is now, what has changed? What has made the landslide better since 2012 that it's now being considered again? Another question, I don't know if Henry Chang is on, but I believe that he actually submitted geotechnological analysis, as he is a geotech himself, and he was analyzing other borings that indicated an ancient landslide right at the site where Mr. Reddy would like to build that could be reactivated by drainage and weight. And I've not heard anything about that on tonight's call, so I'm quite concerned about that. Let's see, there was a comment about, what would be better for the neighborhood. So I would just encourage you all to hear from all the neighbors as to how we feel about this. I don't think anybody would like to lose their home value over this. And then there's comment on the impact on the neighbors, the eastern neighbors being negligible. And I'm one of those eastern neighbors, and I don't consider it negligible. Again, we put substantial savings into this property. We wanted to have the privacy. And so having something right up against our property line is very much undesirable from our perspective. And, I think that it will take down our property value. So I'm not sure, again, why we have to bear that risk and that cost. I think that we all find ourselves with a challenge here on, or am I running out of time?
Yeah, you're 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
If you want to finish up, go ahead.
Well, I just think that, this seems like a tricky lot, and it seems like it's been posing some problem and challenge and litigation and cost and massive insurance claims and things like that. And I'm not quite sure why we can't come up with a solution that doesn't just solve it and doesn't repose these same problems of litigation and damage to the road and just insurance problems, neighbors needing to sue one another. It just seems like there must be a better solution that doesn't involve all of us feeling so at risk up here on this hillside, and that would be more permanent. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Dunn? Commissioner Maggio?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned that you live to the east. Do you live right next to this property?
We do, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah.
Any other questions for Ms. Dunn? Thank you, Ms. Dunn.
Joining is Greg Millar. Mr. Millar, if you can hear us, go right ahead. No, looks we're getting connecting to audio.
Yeah. I think there we go. You're on mute, Mr. Millar. You're on mute, Mr. Millar. There you go.
How's that?
You're up.
All right, very good. Thank you. I appreciate everybody joining tonight. I just want to clarify the comment that Mr. Reddy made, that yes, he and I did have a discussion back several months. I certainly was not supportive of this build, and allude to Ms. Dunn's comments that Mr. Chang here on our street did some borings a few years ago, discovered an ancient landslide that we don't feel has been fleshed out in the EIR. And if there is a build on the site, our concern is that that ancient landslide will be reactivated. So in no way was I supportive of that proposal. Mr. Rady and I did have a discussion. I was in listening mode. It was not a negotiation by any means. And I certainly did not allude to an agreement and support of any building that goes on this site. So for the record, I just want to make it crystal clear that we do not support any build on this site. We appreciate all the investigation that's gone into this. Our major concern is that if that ancient landslide is reactivated, it's going to go into our property, which is obviously a terrible situation for us. In addition, the dump that went on that Mr. Reddy did right after we moved in buried our irrigation lines. That certainly not only did it not advance our relationship with him, but it was a non-starter in terms of trying to work with him on any type of proposal. So I just want to make sure that we know that everybody's clear. We do not support the build, and the conversation that Mr. Reddy and I had, it was certainly cordial, but he stomped off in anger after I was not supportive of working out a negotiation for the land, as you might recall. So I appreciate everybody's time, and that's all I have to say. Oh, hang on. Oh, and also the neighbors are not able to get onto the call for some reason. I'm not sure why that is, but there are a number of neighbors that are trying to get on that are not able to comment.
Thank you. So don't leave us yet, Mr. Millar. I think we've got some questions from the commissioners for you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Radnich, I believe you had your hand up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please clarify which house is yours. Are you directly down, kind of behind this parcel?
We're to the east.
To the east. Okay, thank you. You share the property line?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you.
Okay. 3927.
Any other questions for Mr. Millar? I have one quick question for you. I just want to be clear. You're against any building on that property?
In that proposed site, yes.
Okay.
Moving to a better location for better internet. That is correct. That proposed site is on top of what we believe to be an ancient landslide, and it was not fully covered in the EIR. And therefore, if that's the only buildable site, we're not in favor of any building.
Understood. Thank you. I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Greg, do we have others?
We have three more. Joe and Sylvia Garofalo are being admitted to provide their public comments.
Good evening. Thank you. We are the owners of 3954 Quail Ridge Road, which is directly in front of the slide wall. So it would be to the northwest, of the proposed construction. Exactly. I wanted to just voice our strong opposition as well to the proposed project, really for the same reasons that that Greg and Hannah have articulated. We've also heard tonight that there is apparently an acknowledged active slide that is running parallel to the proposed development. And I frankly have had the opportunity to read some of the documents. That I am an attorney, but not a geologist or civil engineer. And I really haven't heard it adequately addressed what the potential impact of this proposal is on our house, for example. It seems like the focus of the proposed construction is on how there would be, or whether there would be any issue relating to a slide on the proposed construction, but not the adjacent properties. And obviously that concerns us greatly. So I just wanted to articulate those two things, but it seems to me that there's been an acknowledged active slide, but not really any manner to address that in the way that it could impact existing structures. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Gruffalo? We don't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next joining is Alexandra.
Hello, I am trying to find myself on the, let's see. Hi, sorry for taking this as a, hi there.
Hello.
So my name is Alexandra Zach. I'm a resident of Quail Ridge Road. I live on the other side, so not on the construction side. There's an east and a west side of Quail Ridge Road, and I'm one of the first houses on the other side. I've just recently become aware of the project, even though I've lived here for about 8 years or so. And I don't have any comments about the structural or the ability to build on the land itself. I think other people have really addressed that as, you know, sufficiently. My concerns are actually in response to the city's comments to the water board's comments about post-construction stormwater management. It sort of seems to be, the water issues seem to be not addressed really, you know, during this discussion. I can understand because the landslide issue is so critical. However, the requirements for the water board, the mitigation requirements, the concern that they had were that all their recommendations involved direct runoff into the vegetation. And this is in her email to the comments for to the draft EIR. None of those options are going to be feasible because you're having water go directly into the vegetation, which is exactly what the landslide mitigation measures conflict with it, right? So the stormwater, or the landslide mitigation measures are to have everything up to Quail Ridge Road. However, the water board's requirements is that they have direct runoff into the vegetation. So my question is, how do you reconcile these two concerns? And before I go any farther, I forgot to mention that sort of full disclosure, I'm acquainted with the project proponent, Mr. Reddy. I represent a client whom he sued last year unsuccessfully. So I just want to put that out there. So my first issue is with the concerns from the water board, which do not seem to be addressed at all by the city's comments. The city's comments state that they will comply, with the provision C3 site design measures per the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Control Board's municipal stormwater permit. However, they can't comply with it. So I guess my question is, how are you going to reconcile the two when solving one problem then creates another? My second issue is actually with the intended use of the project. And I think this question would be more appropriate to the proponent, Mr. Reddy. You mentioned earlier that one of your family members intends to live there. And I guess my question is, you mentioned that in 2012, that it was your mother. I'm aware that you own another home on Dulles Park Road, 4 Dulles Park Road, and that is currently used as a short-term rental. So my concern is, has it adequately been fleshed out that your use of the project, the intended use, is for a residential project, or is it for another Airbnb type of situation? That hasn't been addressed in any of the environmental documents. And one last thing,
You're muted.
I did submit a comment letter, but it was a little late. It was at like 5:10.
You're muted.
I apologize. Ms. Zach, your time is up. So I'm asking commissioners, do you have any questions for Ms. Zach? No? Thank you.
Next speaker is Scott Ingram joining.
Mr. Ingram, you're up, but you're still muted.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time. I live at the bottom of the hill, bottom of the slide, and would be looking up at this this horrible house stuck on the side of the hill. He's done nothing to address the rest of the slide property that continues to move and is constantly coming into my yard. My yard changes every year with heavy rains, and all the runoff goes across my property in a 2-foot diameter corrugated pipe that was illegally put into the slide without a permit. And I'm opposed to this site because I know that it is an ancient slide and will continue to move. And I don't want to look up constantly at an ugly foundation of a house. The entire neighborhood is against this development. And I, for one, want to make sure that my voice is heard.
Any questions for Mr. Ingram? I have one quick one. What's your address? I'm just trying to get it in my head exactly where your house is in comparison to the proposed site.
I'm 3877 Los Erebus Drive, one house removed, right there. That's I'm at the toe of the slide. I was there when the last house fell down the hill and during the heavy rains. There's 2 creeks that go across my property, the runoff for the entire top of the hill. The water gets pumped into a pipe that goes down and empties out on my property. And then on the west side, I guess that would be the east side of my property, there's a open creek that was really where the landslide started when a East Bay mud pipe broke through there and dumped 400,000 gallons of water, causing the slide to start. I'm the last person in line that still has his rights to sue all my neighbors. I was part of the initial settlement, and I did not agree to sign off with the insurance. So my rights to sue are still intact. And I think that I will be probably having the need to exercise them because this house will not remain stable on that little sliver of land.
Understood. Thank you.
The next speaker is Matthew Kelly.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Just wanted to echo my neighbor's comments in terms of our family's resistance and rejection of this proposed plan. We've been here now for almost 13 years, are fully invested in this community. And much as Ms. Dunn had said, I'm not hearing anything with respect to guarantees of our community safety, nor of any plans with respect to protecting this community from the same type of liability that will inevitably befall us if there is in fact another landslide. And again, given the fact that there is this potential for a landslide given the ancient slide that exists, that needs to be further explored, I just wanted to lodge my objection to this build site. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, what's your address? Where are you in relation to this property?
Yeah, we are located at 3921 Quail Ridge Road, so we share a corner with the subject property.
Got it. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Kelly? No. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker is Shauna or Shayna Smith.
Ms. Smith, you're ready to go, but you're on mute still.
Hi, this is Adam Smith, Shauna's husband. We have the property directly across the development property in question here, 3948 Quail Ridge Road. You'll see there with the Smith, yeah, last name, next to the Garfolos and next to Mrs. Wu. I just want to echo similar opinions from our immediate neighbors, in that, you know, we share some major concerns with the stability of the property in general. I mean, we moved in here in 2013 and have seen, you know, significant changes to the elevation and contours of our street related to this landslide, and then the wall that was built since we moved in, and that's without having any changes to the underlying hillside and development. So, you know, at its core, we're not fundamentally objecting to appropriate development, but in our view, appropriate development would entail some very significant mitigation measures in order to address the broader neighbors' concerns around the possibility of activating the landslide, destabilizing the road, and then fundamentally impacting, you know, multiple homes' ability to access our houses with a pretty major disruption to our lives without knowing there's any way to fix that other than potentially engaging in litigation post that event. And so, you know, look, just to underscore, we completely are aligned with our neighbors and that this is a concern to us, especially if there was any reactivation of the landslide. It's immediately following the end of our very steep driveway leaving our property. You know, should Mr. Reddy be interested in appropriately addressing the concerns of the larger property and Mr. Ingram's concerns around the downstream runoff, or any piece of property could be developed with the, you know, proper investment and safety measures, but it doesn't, in our opinion, seem in any way, shape, or form that the proposal addresses that, other than trying to take advantage of a small piece of usable land on otherwise very unstable hill in order to sort of turn some sort of profit. So, and just to underscore, the Smiths across the street are not in support of the proposed development plan without, you know, significantly more investment to, you know, appropriately structurally secure the hill and the future of the residents' access to the street. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Smith? No. Thank you for your time.
The next speaker is Louise Lemlin.
Ms. Lemelin, you're up and you're on mute.
in light of.
Hi, can you hear? I can start my video as well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So we, like the Kellys, have been living on Quail Ridge for about 13 years. And ever since we moved in there, my husband and I have managed the care of our private road. All of our neighbors have always been on board. We have very cordially worked together to raise the funds necessary to keep our road nice and passable. And Mr. Reddy, since the time of his ownership of the lot, has not wanted to participate in that effort. We had to take him to small claims court to get him to pay his portion. Clearly, he is not really interested in the care of our neighborhood. He is interested in developing this property and making a lot of money on it. So we, as a neighborhood, I think we would agree well with what our other neighbors have said, and we agree with what Mr. Smith just said. From the beginning, if someone wants to develop that property, they need to be extremely clear that this landslide is an active, moving, potentially dangerous landslide. And our upkeep and care of the road has been all about mitigating potential reactivation and potential movement, unnecessary movement of the landslide, or causing greater harm to our homes. So this development is irresponsible. And we can go on about other things, other dealings that we have had with Mr. Reddy and the way that he has used this property in the past. And it is not about being a neighbor, and it is not about building a beautiful home that's going to be really great for Lafayette. It's not about that. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Thank you for your time. Actually, hold on 1 second. It looks like Commissioner Heising has a question for you.
Yeah, my question is, what are the limits of the private road? Where's the road private? Where does it start, and where is the public street stop?
Right. Okay. So there is, as you come to, we could look at the map, or I can explain it to you. As you come to the top of Via Roble, there is, and you turn left onto Quail Ridge, there is one home that is not on the private road. Then the private road begins, and I believe almost every neighbor who is on that private road, from Kate and Matt Haddon all the way down to our home, which is the last house in the court, is on this call. So as I said, we are united in our feeling that this is an irresponsible project. Not least in that Mr. Reddy has showed quite plainly that he is not interested in being a neighbor, in maintaining our road, in maintaining the safety of our homes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Greg, do we have more speakers?
That concludes the individuals who have raised their hand. And once again, to do so, you would click the raise hand button if you're logged in via a computer, or hit *9 if you're logged in via phone. I see no phone numbers. I think everyone has joined by computer, and no more raised hands.
Great, thank you. So we will close public comment on this topic and turn back to the applicant for his rebuttal, and remind us how much time for rebuttal? 5 minutes, I believe?
Up to 5 minutes.
Okay, so you're up, Mr. Reddy.
Yes, I'm going to refer most of the time to Mr. Crop because the public comment raises the significant issues of geotechnical and geological nature. And I would like him to address those regarding the landslide. The only comment I would make though, kind of starting off here, there, a lot of misinformation has just been given. I feel unfortunate about that, to hear that. All I can say is we do, when I say we, the applicant understands the sensitive nature of this site. This is not some quick, fly-by-night deal here or something. If anything, other than Ms. Lemlin and I believe Mr. Ingram, the applicant has actually owned the property longer than the other public commenters. And my only last point would be, if they were so concerned about landslides, why would they buy houses right in a landslide neighborhood? That's all I have to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Crop.
Let me comment on two issues. One, the issue of the ancient landslide has come up. During some of the repair work out there, there was identification of a shear surface that seemed to be going into the hill toward the subject lot that we're talking about tonight. And some geologists or engineers wondered whether that was an indication of an ancient slide. The reason that the large diameter downhole boring was done was to try and address that specific issue, because that's the best way to get physically down. Going down a 70-foot deep, 30-foot shaft is always entertaining to geologists, not so much to everybody else, but you can see in place what the actual geologic conditions were. They evaluated that shear and another shear and concluded they were not related to landsliding. So it was the opinion of both Jim Joyce going down and Cal Engineering Geology as the reviewer from the city that there was not any indication of an ancient slide going underneath that parcel. The second issue is whether this proposed house would cause more sliding. There's going to be massive piers holding this particular triangle of land down, and it's already fairly stable to begin with. So the triangle, as we might call it, is not going to be causing the big slide to move anymore. In fact, it's going to be taking a small amount of loading off of that slide. But that slide has been moving and it will keep moving, but it will not be made to move more by the construction of this particular house with the massive foundations that are proposed. Those are two of the key issues I picked up from the public comments.
Greg, do we still have time?
You still have a minute.
Okay, the only thing I would say very quickly is most of the houses that were built on this street were not engineered properly, and that's the fact, and especially the one that was the old Corporal house that was on this site. The only house that was designed with a very deep foundation, robust foundation, is Mr. Garofolo's house. That was designed, the geotechnical engineer there was Mr. Paul Seidelman, our original engineer until he passed away. When the slide occurred, that house did not move. And it's the very house that Mr. Garofolo bought, knowing full well about the history of the street, and he's right at the top of the landslide. So that's actually proof of how well constructed his house is and what happens when it's well engineered. What we're proposing to build on the triangle, as Mr. Crop has just alluded to, is an improvement over what is there right now. And if you add in our drainage, I am a very big proponent of drainage and I like to exceed C3 stormwater requirements on our projects when we're working on hillsides. The drainage issue is extremely critical. What's there right now is going to be improved upon many folds by this project. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Mr. Reddy or Mr. Crop from the commissioners? Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. So my question is for Mr. Crop, and maybe Nancy can bring up the map, but I'm just it sounds like this slide is massive. Can someone show us on the map and move the cursor around and show us the approximate? Oh, there we go. That's a good map. Okay. So it's affecting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And 7 if you count the very toe of it down there to the south. Okay. All right, so that answers that question. And then my other question is, absent the word reactivation, I think I heard earlier in the presentation, this thing's moving now and will continue to move into the future. Correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So the road has been protected by the stabilization, but the lot area and all those other lots downslope have not been stabilized.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant or Mr. Crop? I have a question. So Mr. Crop, maybe even Mr. Reddy. So this is coming from a layman to say the least, although I did get an A in geology. So just to be clear, I'm still trying to understand. So your point is the house is going to improve what's there right now. And I understand the dynamics of it, right? You're doing foundation work, you're doing everything. You're basically, layman's terms, you're steadying that triangle, so to speak. So my question is, during the construction, will that affect the landslide more than the slight movement that you're intimating is going to go on in the future? The actual construction.
Not any significant way. No.
Okay.
You're drilling holes. You're not driving piles that cause vibration. You're drilling holes. That really doesn't induce a lot of destabilization.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Mason.
Thank you for Mr. As someone who's worked in the Loma area for a long time, just two basic questions. One is, my understanding between this and the Oakland Berkeley Hills, these slide conditions are not unique just to this property. And two, I generally tell people, as far as modern seismic design, if your house is built after 84, you're probably okay. What would you, since we have so many old houses in Lafayette, what would you consider the cutoff, saying a house built after whatever year, 94, 97, 2000 would have a modern, should have a modern foundation?
I'll just say there's been a variation in styles of practice among geotechnical engineers. So starting in the 80s and 90s, I think some of the better designed houses are doing quite well. Unfortunately, there's been some less well-designed houses, even in the 90s, that didn't do quite so well. It is a challenging environment geologically from the natural standpoint, and then grading activities that started in the 50s and 60s and 70s, unfortunately, often caused some further destabilization, as did other poor drainage measures. So it's a complicated thing to try and set off a cutoff date. But when the area first started getting houses, say in the 50s and 60s, we've learned a lot since then, shall we say, and those houses from the 50s through 70s are often not as well designed, although many are doing okay, as those from the 80s onward.
Thank you.
My only comment there is the most of the houses on this whole tract were built, I think it's 1977 to 79, except for the former Bakar house, which is now the Garofalo house. That was built in 86 and built by Mr. Seidelman. That previous drawing where you have the landslide going and you have one house just sitting there right at the top, that house probably stopped the landslide from being even bigger, is my theory, probably due to Mr. Seidelman's engineering. That's my only comment.
Any more questions from commissioners for the applicant? Commissioner LaBonge?
Can you hear me all right? So I'm trying to absorb all the comments from the folks in the neighborhood, and I understand their concern. And so I'm trying to, in my mind, get wrapped around if, you know, the presence of a development, which I agree, or Mr. Kropp explained, and it makes sense to me that you can harden this corner, and if you don't affect the rest of the slide area, you're taking something and you're making one section of it better. If it doesn't deteriorate the rest, to me that seems good. So I'm taking that on face value right now. But my other thought, and I'm curious, and I'm not sure if this is Mr. Kropp or this is going to be Nancy or Greg or someone else, but would there be a requirement of this development to do some additional drainage considerations that are not part of the housing, part of the overall parcel that's owned, that would be more stabilization for the rest of the parcel? Is there any? Should there be? That's my main question. I have more, but Greg, is that something you can address?
So Stephen, you were a little in and out there. I think we heard you, but I'll let Greg take a stab at it.
What I think we heard you asking was, would this applicant be obliged or required through a condition of approval or mitigation measure to construct some off-site drainage improvements in order to mitigate potential destabilization impact of stormwater? And I think I would ask our CEQA consultants to speak to that. There's arguably potentially two reasons why an applicant would be required to do offsite improvements. And one is if the proposal would, under normal circumstances, irrespective of a slide or geotechnical issues, just produce enough runoff that there is insufficient downstream capacity. And so there may be some capacity issues downstream that would need to be upgraded to be able to accommodate the project. But I understand this to be a different question related to geotechnical and soil stability issues that would stem from the drainage. And so I think Mr. Ryan perhaps could speak to that, or Ms. Kremen.
Sorry, I'm losing my light. Yeah, I cannot speak to that. We did not find that there would be enough off-site indirect impacts from the project where mitigation measures, CEQA mitigation measures, would be required, right? We can only impose mitigation measures on impacts that we found to be significant and need mitigation. Conditions of approval are slightly different, but yeah, from our impact analysis with all the information we gathered, all the geotechnical surveys, nothing showed that there would be anything, the huge offsite impacts from drainage and stormwater and anything else. I don't know, Kevin, if you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you did a pretty good job, Darcy. I have nothing else to add.
So with that, I think the response is no, there's neither through a condition of approval or proposed mitigation measure would there be offsite improvements needed to be done at the by this project.
Okay.
Commissioner Heisen. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stephen.
I'll try to make it short. Is there any requirement for a landowner to mitigate a slide area that goes over their property? Because this obviously goes over, but it goes over other property too. I'm just trying to understand what nexus there is on nature versus ownership.
Surely. To my knowledge, from a zoning and land use perspective, to my knowledge, there's no requirement for a property owner to repair a slide that affects multiple properties and would involve those multiple properties in order to effectuate a repair. I know that after the slide in 97, there were many years of lawsuits that followed, and that is where it would be adjudicated and resolved. So to my understanding, there's no court order requiring it, and to my knowledge, there's no planning or land use law that requires it.
Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you. So this kind of gets back to the drainage, and one of the commenters, Miss Alexandra, brought up post-construction stormwater management. And I know the conditions and mitigation measures speak to C3, and that's clean water requirements. So that's my understanding is that's where you filter the water to get the silt out, and you're basically cleaning the water to make sure you're not adding silt and things to waterways and creeks. But what about the quantity of the water, the actual runoff? If there's C3 requirements in the drainage plan, that just means the downspouts from the impervious surface, the driveways, the roof are going to be cleaned. And I'm just not clear here. Does the water go to the street in a piped system, or is it going to flow down the hill onto that slide?
We're taking that as a question to the applicant team on what their design is.
Or someone on the the city's team. Yes, either team.
I'll ask Mr. Reddy to address it first.
I think I'll let Mr. Crop deal with whether, I don't believe we want any water flowing down into the slide mass.
I would agree. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, so typically what happens is, well, we have our C3 requirements, and we'll come up with a drainage and grading plan. And what I'm imagining here is if we need to elevate the flow by way of a sump or pump, something like that, to the proper drainage to divert it, that's how it would be accomplished. But I'm not the civil engineer here, but Alan could probably opine here a little bit in terms of water flow.
Only kind of in general terms, because that's usually done by the civil engineer for the project. So the idea that it's going to be flowing through something that's going to take out some of the inappropriate materials that were within the water, yes, but my understanding is it would still ultimately go in probably some type of a pipe to the street. It would absolutely be a terrible idea to clean up the water, but then dump it anywhere where it could work its way back into the landslide. So I think it ultimately would be a grassy swale or catchment area, various things, but then that the water, after cleaning, if we want to call it that, would go to the street, not downhill.
I can add to that we have a mitigation measure in the report. It's GEO 2B that requires the drainage to be designed to convey the stormwater to Quail Ridge Road and into the city's municipal stormwater system. Typically C3 is not only for clean water, but it is for retention so that it doesn't go, the water doesn't all leave the site at the same time so that you don't have an inundation in the stormwater system and an overflow. So the C3 requirements are kind of twofold. They're for clean water and also for water retention for a certain time period so that you have less coming in, a volume coming in at the same time. And really the civil engineers, they're really good at designing these things now to meet both the city's requirements and the Bay Area requirements.
Yeah, my only comment on that is right now what you have is when we have our flash floods and all our rain, it's just pouring over the property, going right down into the slide. by constructing this project, we're going to intercept that water and divert it out, or maintain the flow at a constant rate and not having this. It's an improvement to that, at least the triangle area.
Yeah, thanks for that. My comment, one of my comments is the cleaning of the water. You're correct. Is one of the aspects that the regional board requires, and then one of the more one of the newer requirements was what you referred to as hydro modification, which does take the peak off the flow, but it doesn't it doesn't particularly limit to the same volume of water gets to where it's going, which is typically downhill. Now, if there's a mitigation measure or a condition of approval that requires all the water that's generated off the site to be put into a cistern or entrapped somehow and pumped up to the street, that's even above and beyond hydro modification. And I would agree with Mr. Crop. You don't want to introduce any water to the slide that might be generated off that site. So did I hear that correctly, that there is a condition that requires all the water to be taken up to the storm system in the street? And then I'm assuming that's a private street that the city doesn't maintain, and there's a pipe that runs down that private drive till it gets to the public street where it joins in, and it's not being diverted into a creek or something.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. The mitigation measure is written to that the city has final design approval of the stormwater system, but that it should be conveyed, the stormwater should be conveyed to the street. So I don't think that's uphill the way that the design is right now, but obviously the civil engineers have to figure out how to make sure that the water is being conveyed into the city's stormwater system.
All right, do we have any more questions for the applicant? Commissioner Heising?
Not of the applicant. I had a question for staff.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close the time for the applicant and pull it back into the commission for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heising, go ahead and
yes. Okay, yeah, thank you. So this was brought up by Commissioner Maggio earlier relative to her observations of the street. And at the time she made those comments, I wasn't aware that the street was private. And one of the things I made a note was oftentimes there are conditions of approval that require a pre and post construction survey, and then a developer's obligated to make any road improvements. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Can we condition a pre and post survey on a private street?
We would not have enforceability of such a condition.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions of staff? If not, we'll just pull him in to discuss the EIR and the project. All right, so let me throw the first part of that issue out, the EIR. Comments, questions, concerns? All right, let me put it this way. Everybody approves of the EIR. Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you. So we talked about utilities and redundancy and having anything that carries water be in a sleeve. And this is out of the MMRP's GO 2A that I referenced earlier. So when pipelines are built, utility lines are built, they're oftentimes pressure tested. So I guess if there was a sleeve around a pipe, I would want to make sure that that exterior sleeve that's offering the redundancy is as well equipped to control or hold back the water as the pipe itself. So I don't know if that would be an amendment to one of the mitigation measures, or would it be a specific condition of approval? Or maybe it's just a comment that the designers can take into account, and then staff can just make sure it's part of the design. But that's a comment I had on one of the mitigation measures. And then on GO 2B, which is landscaping irrigation, the intent of that mitigation measure is to not introduce any new water to the slide area. So you have a landscape system. It speaks to having low water plants, and that's the intent, not to over irrigate an area. It speaks to not watering after a rain event, things of that nature, all for the purpose of not adding water to the slide. One of the things I've seen, sometimes irrigation systems malfunction, sometimes it's user error, sometimes a pipe bursts when you're on vacation or something. So, and this again, I don't know if it would be appropriate to be in the mitigation measure itself or a condition. There are automatic shutoff valves that have flow meters in them that if something happens, that it automatically shuts off if it runs for a certain amount of time and it just times out. I'm just thinking something like that would be good in this situation. So those are just two comments that I had relative to what I saw in the MMRP.
Thank you. So this is to Greg Wool. So what are your thoughts on that? Is it as a comment, as an amendment? What's the best method of getting in Commissioner Heising's suggestions?
Firstly, I think staff can support both of those because they further the intent of the mitigation measure. And so I'll ask Darcy for an in the moment consultant and see if it would be straightforward to amend those mitigation measures. And if not, we can certainly make them, I think, conditions of approval.
No, I think we can make those changes to the mitigation measures. We'll make sure we have the wording correct and that the commission can adopt the MMRP tonight with those additions. And we can work with staff on the language.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners on the EIR? I see none. Let me ask a question of you, Greg Wool, procedurally. Do we have to move separately to adopt the EIR, or is that part of the whole resolution with the project?
I'll ask Nancy to chime in, but my recollection is that the resolution is crafted. So there's a single resolution which incorporates two actions within it. So you would adopt the resolution, which would certify the EIR and take action on the project. So yes. So you do not need to act separately.
Separate, great, thank you. So let me just ask, straw poll, just on the EIR, can you weigh in on approving certifying the EIR? Go ahead, Commissioner Radnich.
Oh, that wasn't me, right? That was like straw poll.
Okay. Thank you. And I think I saw Commissioner Mason raise his hand too. Commissioner Maggio, Labange, Heising, same in terms of certifying the EIR with the additional changes proposed by Commissioner Heising.
Yes, and just to note real quick, I was just looking at the staff report, page 11 of 12. It said there's 2 resolution numbers, so
yeah,
just
that's why I asked the question, because it was 2020-16 and 2020-17. That's the reason I asked.
So that's just a typo. There's only one resolution that approves both.
No, there are 2 resolutions.
Okay, so we could act separately if we wanted.
Yes.
Okay,
got it. Okay.
Thank you, Nancy, for clarifying that.
So let me throw that out. Are the other commissioners open to approving these separately or voting on them separately? You can do a hands up vote on this straw poll. Are you open to that, or you want to combine? I'm just throwing that question out there. Commissioner Mason, you look like you want to weigh in.
I think we should just combine them all. I don't see, regardless of whether you support or not support the project, I don't see any need to separate them.
Okay. Commissioner Labange, it looks like you're trying to weigh in too, in slow motion robot mode.
Can you hear me now? I've switched to my phone.
Yes, kind of.
Okay, combine.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Commissioner Maggio?
No, I'm probably going to be an outlier in that I'd like to take them separately.
Okay. Commissioner Heising? Thoughts separate together?
I could go either way. I mean,
let me know how that fence is that you're sitting on later. I'm kidding. Come on, a little levity here, people. Commissioner Radnich?
I think separate would be cleaner.
Okay. I'm also comfortable with doing it separately because we do have 2 separate resolutions, and it's not that we would be doing anything untoward by dividing them up because they're presented separately too. So let me put this out there. Does anybody want to move on the EIR? That's a solid no, it looks like. So let me suggest this, Commissioner Heising, since you had suggested changes, do you want to move to adopt the EIR?
sure, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2020-16, certifying the EIR with the modifications to the mitigation measures I made mention of.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. So let's go through it one by one. Let's do a vote on this. Commissioner Heising, you moved for it, but still, your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Labange?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Mason?
Aye.
Commissioner Radnich?
Aye.
And the Vice Chair, aye. So we have a 6-0 vote certifying the EIR under Resolution 2020-6 with the modifications proposed by Commissioner Heising. Okay, moving to the actual project. Thoughts from the commissioners? Okay, Commissioner Heising.
Yeah, I'll go. So my biggest concern here is that the project well, I wanted to do a number of things. I don't want water to be introduced to the slide. I don't want anything to do with the drilling of the piers to impact the slide. And I understand the concept of fortifying that triangle there where it's proposed. I'm not in favor of a variance for setback. I think the project should meet the setback while still protecting the slide as much as possible. And one of the mitigation measures was I don't know if it was 1 or 3, regarding the cantilever design and being set back from the slide. And so when I look at the alternatives, the proposed doesn't do it for me because it's 3 feet off the property line. And then I prefer alternative B because it's a smaller footprint. There's less impervious surface. It meets all the setbacks. It removes less trees. And it has the least amount of the cantilevered area over the slide, which was one of the mitigation measures that of the EIR we just approved.
So sorry to interrupt you. Did you mean A instead of B? I think B has more space than A.
Alternative A, yeah. I was speaking. Yeah, sorry if I misspoke. I was speaking to alternative A relative to the proposed. So if I misspoke, I apologize.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, thank you. And it's also the smallest, since it is a very constrained site. I like that alternative because it's also the smallest. It's the smallest square footage home of the 3 laid out before us. So those are my thoughts at this point. And going to one of the comments the applicant made relative to alternative A, he had indicated that he was fine. He was actually going to look at a flat roof, and that way we wouldn't even need a height variance. So we'd be sticking to the height requirements in this zoning district. So I think those are my comments to start off with.
Thank you. Commissioner Maggio, and then Commissioner Labange after.
Thank you. I would agree with Commissioner Heising, no variances. And I think what we really want to work on is reducing impervious surfaces, because then you have less runoff water to deal with. So a larger structure means more runoff to contend with and figure out. It creates a problem. So I would say no more than 2,500 square feet or less, no variances. I would require DRC to work on the design so that it meets the design guidelines for hillsides, have it stacked down, have it present, a low profile front. I think we can go with A, but rework the design. And I'm saying A because of the smaller size, less runoff, less things to mitigate. I still have concerns about water management because it depends on compliance. And if you have things that need compliance that are not enforceable, like maintenance of the street, that gives me a lot of pause, because it seems like the neighbors have done a really good job of banding together and doing all that they can to keep the water out of the street, maintain the integrity of the street. And so but we can't mandate it. And with all the construction that's going to happen on that road for the development, I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to the street and our ability not to be able to enforce improvements unless we can put them in the development plan. I don't know.
Thank you.
The city can comment on what what tools we have to monitor and make sure that the owner developer is able to maintain the condition of the street and able to comply with all of the water requirements.
So certainly with respect to maintenance of the street and in a public street scenario where the street that is being that accesses the site is a public street, the city, as essentially the owner of the street, has a mechanism in place, an encroachment permit process by which and generally the practice is to have photographs and a video taken and registration marks on the street so you know where you are before construction begins, and then monitor it throughout, but certainly do that same process at the end, and you will be able to distinguish between those 2 points in time if the damage was essentially caused by the heavy construction work and construction vehicles. There are private roads, and the Road Maintenance Association has a similar process. So it's not to say there's no mechanism, but it's just not a city mechanism. It would be a private mechanism.
Yeah, I'm concerned with the part of the road that's private. That's where I see the movement. There's active movement in this area. And so introducing construction is a concern if we can't be sure that the builder is going to be compliant and work with the neighbors. So I've got some concerns that are not resolved.
Commissioner Macho, can I ask you a quick question about your earlier comment? You mentioned that you wanted 2,500 square feet or less. Were you talking about the impervious area or the house? Because the house is under alternative A is 2,450 square feet, but the impervious square footage is 3,300. So I was just trying to get a sense of which you were referring to.
Oh, I was referring to the house size, but I would try to keep the impervious surface to a bare minimum.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Labange.
Initially, I wasn't as concerned with the variance on the setback, but my big here, Mr.
Stephen, we're barely getting a word in and out.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll just be short. I'm not good at that. I prefer alternative A now, given that there's concern for additional, I think, footprint, less cantilever means less torque on the piers. To me, just means less potential for development to cause conditions to the slide area. So I'm in support of variance or only roof line. That's it.
Sorry, one last question. What was the last thing about the roof line that didn't come through?
With the lower roof line at 35 feet, the flat roof.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Mason and Commissioner Radnich, any comments? Commissioner Radnich?
Yeah, I'd like to echo Commissioner Maggio. I think she worded it exactly how I would have worded it. I do feel runoff control is a concern. I think it's obviously a very close-knit community and neighborhood on the road, and so far, unfortunately, the comments we've heard tonight are kind of alluding to the fact that maybe that same sense of neighborhood might not be continued. Hopefully it is moving forward. I also feel that the project is trying to it feels like it's being squeezed into the tiny little corner. And for that reason, sorry for the barking. My kids clearly don't hear the dog, but for that reason, I would support alternative A over the proposed project or over alternative B. Since it is, like I said, I feel like the project is being squeezed into the tiny little portion of the site that has in the past been least affected by the slide. I don't think it should be on the neighbors to have to kind of deal with the fact that the project would be, potentially having a variance to get rid of or to reduce the side yard setbacks and the street setbacks. And I also support the lower roof height. And I also don't want us to forget, during staff's presentation, I think it was staff that made the comment about revising the tree mitigation calculation in the resolution. So right now I can make the findings. I just think we should be clear in some of our direction moving forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Mason?
I also support alternate A. I think the big salient point is, by all intents and purposes, the slide will probably continue sometime in the future. If anything, this house will stabilize one little corner of the property, certainly won't hurt it. And A is a reasonable compromise. I also live on a private road. Mine's far less well-maintained than Quail Ridge. It's hoped that the neighbors can find a way to work together. But just like my road, it's kind of outside our jurisdiction.
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat what everybody else said. I completely agree with alternative A, and interestingly enough, I think the applicant also said alternative A instead of the proposed project, which is kind of interesting. I think that came out earlier. I think the smaller the better. I'm still concerned about the construction and its effects on the other properties. And if anything happens, I mean, it's going to be litigation. And I think the applicant knows that. And I have to say, from the number of neighbors who chimed in today, at least 3 of them were lawyers. So, so they're going to have to, the applicant's going to have to make sure that things get done the right way, because if anything goes south, so to speak, probably not the best street to be on to deal with your neighbors. I wish there was more we could do with respect to the road, but I understand the private road issue. I knew that coming in, and we've discussed this before on other projects, that we don't have purview over the private roads. And again, I always defer to the experts on the staff and the analysts who look at these issues, that this is going to make it, that part of it, safer. The last thing I will also say is, and again, if this slide is going to continue, I still don't grasp fully building a home there, knowing that it's going to slide right past you at best. That's the best case scenario. It doesn't affect this new home, but that's where it is, and that's where I am. We have any other comments or questions from anyone? Does anybody want to make a motion? Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I'll move that we approve the project subject to conditions as articulated in Planning Commission Resolution 2020-17, And then also subject to comments made that we prefer alternative A. I think that covers everything.
Yeah, I would, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Radnick. No, go ahead.
And I'm sure you're going to say the same thing. And also, Commissioner Heising, if you wouldn't mind also adding in the part about revising the tree mitigation calculation.
Oh, right. Per staff's earlier comment. Yes, I will add that in as a friendly amendment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We're going to do a roll call here. Came from you, but Commissioner Heising?
Aye.
Commissioner LaBonge?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Nay.
Commissioner Mason?
Aye.
Commissioner Radnich?
Aye.
Vice Chair, aye. So we have a 5-1 in favor. And 14 days to appeal, correct? To the City Council.
Correct.
Thank you, everyone. Let's see, moving to other business, ARC volunteer, July 31st. Commissioner Mason, is that a volunteer or are you running for it?
Yeah, I will take it.
Okay, Commissioner Mason is our ARC volunteer for July 31st. Do we have any commissioners' reports? None. Planning director's report, if any.
I think the Planning Commission may be aware that the Terraces of Lafayette application was appealed by a council member, and so we will be scheduling the first meeting in early August to have the City Council consider the Terraces application.
Thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off. Anything else?
I don't know if I had reported this previously to you, but Adam Wright, who was a planning tech with the department for several months, has decided that planning is not his passion and is pursuing other avenues. And so his last day was June 30th.
Right. Thank you. Thanks. Hopefully he'll get a recording contract. I'm kidding. I don't know what his passion is. Okay, with nothing else, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Everyone have a great rest of the week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.